So we spent yesterday talking a lot about relationships. We talked about kind of expectations. David sort of dovetailed some of the things that we talked about related to the attitude continuum in terms of his setting expectations and his notion of the promise that we give and that we make to people who are either donors or people who receive our correspondence. So I want to kind of, again, start to put some more pieces of the puzzle together. I think I showed this yesterday. In fact, I know I did, and I know you'll see it again. But remember, this process of development is not about fundraising. It's not about transactions. It's not about arrangements. It is about the things that we do to develop relationships with other people. Just like we build a relationship with our Heavenly Father, these are relationships that we build because it really is, let's face it, God that provides the resources, the finances for us to do what God has called us to do. Our Heavenly Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. And if we need just a hoof or a leg or a hindquarter, He can provide that for us as our organizations need it. Higher level thinking today, we're going to talk about 8 different areas of development. You will see this kind of cut across the things I share tomorrow and Wednesday as well. We have worked on these for a number of years. Jerry, who you'll meet tomorrow if you haven't met him yet, is celebrating his 51st year in the field of professional development. So he's kind of refined these over time, both in staff situations with a major university, Christian university here in the States, as well as with his own consulting business. And we see these kind of the 8 major elements or areas related to development. So picture the Olympic rings, except there are 8 of them instead of 5, and they're all kind of their own ring, but they're all connected as well. So a really solid development plan strategy in our mind is one that has all 8 of these, maybe not in equal measure, but at least in the measure that best fits your ministry and your organization. So fundraising, recruitment, how do we find people, how do we identify them? We'll talk about that a bit today. Retention, we'll talk about a bit tomorrow. Public relations, we'll probably not spend as much time on that as maybe we could, but hopefully some of Keith's thoughts yesterday helped cover some of that. Database management, we'll touch on that just a little bit today in terms of how you can organize your database for better impact. Strategic planning, Jerry's got a whole session for us tomorrow to talk about strategic planning and the importance of that, mission, vision, having a strategic plan and a development plan that really work together to make sure that we can accomplish all those things that we believe God has called us to accomplish. How do you get things organized? How do we get things put together? Won't spend a lot of time, unfortunately, on that, but a little bit of time on that. And then outcomes. I see a lot of nonprofits and faith-based groups in this country particularly spend a lot of time talking about how busy they are, how active they are. We have so much going on. And yet I think at the end of the day, what people want to know, what are the outcomes that we're experiencing as a ministry? What sorts of life change are we seeing? So activity is important, but it's really a means to an end. We need to think at some point in our communication, in our metrics and how we measure things, what are the outcomes that we're experiencing? And what are the outcomes that we want to see? So make sure that the strategies we have, the communication we have, the programming that we have really focuses on the end result, the outcome of that, as opposed to just being busy all the time. So they're kind of those big 8 areas. We'll cover some of these in more in depth today and tomorrow and Wednesday. Won't be able to get every single one of them in because of the limited nature of our time together. So there's that relationship definition again, rational relationships. And if you can see off and to the right, I've just kind of brainstormed what I think are things that we think are important elements in a relationship that we have with somebody. Trust, community, with what we're growing with them as individuals and as 2 people. They might be friends. We might have some loyalty to them or some affinity to them. We're maybe meeting people's needs. We're sharing knowledge. That's just a word cloud that kind of, for me, demonstrates some of the descriptors that we would use to talk about a relationship, a rational relationship with someone in our ministry, as opposed to, oh, we have a donor who's going to give us money, so we have this transaction or this arrangement with them. So again, it's pretty simple. I'm trying to reinforce this without belaboring, but realize that we're focused on relationships, not so much on fundraising, not so much on the actual check process or the contribution process, although we're going to spend some time today doing that. It really is in the notion and the context, the prism, if you will, of relationships. So I think one thing we can talk about in terms of relationships, I have a lot of people in the States, when they get off the airplane and talking with a client, I'm traveling today to go see a client tomorrow. So my background tomorrow will be different. It'll be from a hotel room. But people say, oh gosh, I could never do what you do. And I said, well, I think you probably can. No, I can't. I don't think I can do what you do. And I think for us, the one thing that Jerry's talked about for years now is that the process of development in terms of relationships is really sort of like the process of falling in love or being in love, or being in a very deep friendship. I have some people I've been in a small community group with my church for a number of years. Our kids have grown up together. We've experienced weddings together. We've experienced funerals together and everything in between. And it just takes time to grow a rational relationship, just like it's taken time for me to grow a loving relationship with my wife, Elaine. But I think in many times, if we think about this notion of not the fundraising thinking that we do sometimes, but the relationship thinking, what does that look like to build a deep friendship, to build a deep relationship with someone who happens to be a partner in our ministry? So I want to share just a diagram we've used for many, many years now. We call it the relationship continuum. And it really kind of, I think, kind of charts a little bit of what we're thinking about if we look at this relationship idea from a dating or a marriage relationship. So let's just say that's Elaine and Greg. And we met many, many years ago, be 39 years of marriage come this September. So other than Jesus, that's about as long as I've stuck with anything. And I really married into a situation that I never could have crafted for myself, and it was purely God ordained. But there's Greg and Elaine, and we met many, many years ago, and actually met through a friend of hers that I happened to be going out with at the time. So there's a very long story there that I won't go into, but nonetheless, Elaine and Greg met. And we had kind of these individual, we call them exposure events in development, but they were, interactions. Maybe it was on the phone way back when we didn't have the internet and didn't have social media, and we were actually talking on the old landline phone. Maybe it was because we went to an event together, but we had some sort of exposure to each other and said, gosh, that's an interesting individual, like the personality. What would that look like to maybe get to know that person a little bit better? And kind of think through that. And then maybe we had another get together. And, sometimes if it's someone you really, really like and really want to get to know, and this could be in a ministry situation as well. I have a number of people I meet in travels and go, wow, I'm in a meeting with them and think, wow, they just are a good thinker, and I really appreciate their thoughtfulness and kind of the insights that they brought. I'd like to get to know that person better, male or female, just kind of figure out what they're all about and see if there's some sort of relationship that we can get together with. So I want to make that connection pretty quickly after the first connection, so I don't lose momentum, right? So I don't lose track of what's going on. So kind of keep those exposure events in a relatively short time frame. I mean, you don't want to force it, obviously, but Jerry tells a story about the first time he went out with Sue, his wife, soon-to-be wife, and realized that they had the first date, and he really enjoyed that time. So he called her, and the very next day they went on their second date. And Sue was okay with that. And so that was kind of this notion of having another event, another exposure to somebody in a short period of time. And as that relationship grows, whether it's a male-female, whether it's male-male, female, professional, you just have these interactions with people as you go along, right? And you have these different things that happen. And at some point, there's a change in the relationship, and that's what these brackets represent. And there's a decision that's to be made, or a determination that's required, but that's what those brackets represent. And then once that decision or the determination is made, then you may continue on with some other get-togethers, events, dates, courting, whatever you want to call that. So, and what I want to just kind of point out here is I want to focus now on that series of brackets. And we think that this really kind of equates to me and Elaine in terms of, we had this conversation. She was going off to college. I was staying home. I was going to be about 2 hours away from her, but I didn't want to miss that relationship. So we had this conversation one day. And I remember the conversation very distinctly. I can see the room that we were in. I know what the weather was like outside, and it was something that fundamentally changed our relationship. And it's when we decided to go to that next step, to be more exclusive, to be more connected to each other. And for us, we use the term that the pronouns change in the relationship. So instead of I and me talking all the time, the pronoun becomes us and we. So this conversation that we had with I had with Elaine before she went off to college, it was not so much, well, what am I going to do with my career? It became how are we going to work our relationship around my career? Or more importantly, how we work my career around this relationship, because the relationship is most important. So and I think you can experience that in lots of different ways. I've had that happen with relationships with brothers in Christ, had that happen professionally, where all of a sudden the us and the we, the I and the me become us and we. And you can feel almost, you can sense when those pronouns change. And that's the determining factor. That's a decision that's made that alters the course of the relationship. In a marriage relationship, you're going deeper. You've committed to each other exclusively. You've set a date. You've started the planning. You've told your friends. And if it's in a professional relationship, maybe there's something else going on where you're mentoring each other and coaching each other now, because you've kind of reached this level of the I and the me is going away, and it's us and it's we. So the pronouns change in that respect. And I think if we put this in the notion of a relationship or a rational relationship, the emotion just grows deeper. I love Elaine now emotionally more than I did 38 years ago. But the rational behavior is also as deep. And she puts up with a lot of stuff that I do and has over the years. And I'm very grateful for that. But it's a very rational decision that she makes, to forgive me, or to avoid or ignore my idiosyncrasies, my messy desk, my messy office. She just closes the door and goes on her way. But the emotion doesn't go away. The same with our donors, I think, and with our partners. As people are connected to us, they really have a strong emotional connection to us, but they also have a very strong rational connection to us. So the behavior as a donor, to support us, to pray for us, to be involved as a volunteer, really becomes kind of this rational act, not so much oh, this organization is so wonderful, and if I don't know what to do without them. It becomes, I'm committed to this organization. I'm supportive of this organization. I want to do what I can do within my giftings, within my talents, to make sure this organization continues the outcomes that they're trying to connect to. So again, this relationship continuum, trying to find a point in the relationship where the I and the me becomes the us and the we. So let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about things that we think through in this country, that we kind of call the process of solicitation, or inviting people to actually be a supporter of our organization. And a supporter doesn't necessarily mean funds. It could be volunteers, could be per support, could be an advocate for us in our ministry within their church. But here's kind of the process, and depending on whose model you look at, sometimes this is 4 steps, sometimes this is 7 steps. We just happen to use 5. You kind of see where this kind of fits into it. So identifying who's out there, how do we connect with them, how do we get in our database, qualifying them, how do we determine what the right time is to maybe ask them and for how much, cultivating that relationship. We'll talk about cultivating, soliciting, and sustaining tomorrow. We'll focus on identifying and qualifying today. So let's look at identifying in terms of what that means to our organization, trying to find people that could fit into our organization. These are some comments I hear from people all the time as I work with them. We just don't have enough people in our email database. We don't know enough people in the community. We have a small town or a small village, and not many people we can actually go to build the relationships with. Or we just don't know people who have a lot of money, so we feel handcuffed and stymied trying to raise dollars or trying to build relationships because they just don't know rich people, which I think is a very common misnomer about development. But really, I think for us, these are all kind of valid questions, I think ones that we need to kind of cut through pretty quickly, realizing that there are different ways to go about identifying people and actually getting them into our database. Clearly, we have about 18, 15 people on this call, probably from a dozen different countries, at least 3 different continents, if not 4 different continents. So with technology, obviously, there's really no limit to how we can reach out to people and invite people to partner with us. I knew a number of Heartbeat pregnancy care centers in this country last year that had to do virtual events, virtual banquets, instead of an in-person banquet and a meal. And they really decided to go way outside their kind of service area and start to invite people from other states, other communities, to be a part of this virtual event. And they brought a large number of new people into their database. Now, I'm not sure how well they did it in terms of getting the us and the we to happen, but just had more people added to their database, because there's really, with technology, we can do a lot of things. And the word that we use to talk about this is really called linkage. How are people linked to your organization? How are people connected to your organization in a real, tangible way? We talk about relational linkage. Those are people that already have some sort of connection to your organization. And we talk about created linkage. And I think that's the example that Martin was using earlier. Who do you know that knows someone that can introduce you to an individual that you're trying to start or build a relationship with? So that's a real important terminology or word in our thinking about development, is how are those people linked to us already in our database? And if they're not linked, how can we connect with them through someone that we know, maybe through a board member of ours, maybe through a friend, maybe through a pastor? There are ways to connect to other people. I don't know if you remember, in this country had a really crazy popular cultural thing about 15 years ago that was called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon is an actor in Hollywood, and it actually became a drinking game on college campuses, and you could connect almost anybody in Hollywood within 6 relationships of Kevin Bacon. So and so was in a movie, who was in a movie with such and such, was in a movie with this individual, who happened to be in a movie with Kevin Bacon, and that was kind of the connection. Well, interestingly enough, that theory came out in the late 1920s from a European social scientist, in days before the internet, before email, before jet travel, before social media. That person, I forget the person's name now, kind of developed that same thinking. And I heard someplace, I'm not sure the validity of this, but I heard someplace that now with social media, that 6 degrees of separation, that 6 relationships, is now down to like 3 relationships. So a great exercise for you and your board to go through is, who are people that we'd like to have to be a part of our organization, and start to canvass your board and your volunteers. Who do you know that might know this individual? And that's how you create the linkage that then becomes the relational linkage once they get into your database. So again, kind of the people that are most closely linked to you, people in your database already have some sort of linkage. It may be very mild, it may be very informal, or it may be very strong and very healthy. But those people who already have some sort of connection with you, we would call that relational linkage. And then so here's a couple of examples. And I gave some different examples. These may or may not fit your organization or your ministry. So kind of think through your own lens in terms of your ministry. But I think about a Christian school. I mean, there are people already connected to a Christian school: students, the parents of the students, the grandparents of those students, the alumni of those students. Many schools, Christian schools in this country, were founded or are connected to a local church fellowship. So one of those linkages would be that church, obviously, or the churches whose students come to that school. So those are already connected and natural relationships that can be built, can be fostered, can be grown, that are already part of the kind of the orbit of your relationships in your ministry. I think of pregnancy care centers. We do a lot of work in this country with pregnancy care centers. Obviously, churches that support pro-life activity in this country, local hospital medical staff, people who are family members of clients. That young woman who found herself in an unexpected, desperate, situation with a pregnancy she didn't know she wanted, and how do you work with them? But what about her parents? What about her grandparents? What about her family members who saw life change in this young woman because of the outreach of that ministry? Again, that's kind of a natural connection. In your local church, we have members, we have people who come to church who may not be formal members, they come less often. We may have a Sunday school or church school situation, may have a weekday ministry that happens in our church. Those are all people that have a natural kind of a connection in terms of relationship to your church. So you could probably think through it in a few minutes, think through your ministry and who are the groups of people that we have that sort of connection with that's a very natural relational, I'm starting to stutter my R's, sorry about that, natural relationship. So here's some that I think through that people don't usually think about. What about people who support your ministry that sell you your print supplies or your office supplies or your hardware? What about local media that you send press releases to or articles to? What about the people that come in and fix your building when it's broken? Those are people that have relationships with you, a different type of relationship perhaps, but also one that maybe could be explored and prayed over and considered if that's something that we need to grow or not. Then there's this created linkage, and those are people that we don't have a connection with right now. They could be potential donors, they could be potential volunteers, could be anybody that we think we'd like to have part of an organization for whatever reason. I live in a somewhat small town, and there are probably 4, 5, or 6 families in the community that are kind of known as the philanthropic families. And if you're going to do something really big in a philanthropic way, a new building, a new project, a new whatever, those are the families that you're going to try to connect with. Now, I don't know any of those families personally, but I know people who know them. And so if I needed to get a hold of them, I could start to make that connection. As Martin pointed out, people that know people that I can maybe connect with. There might be organizations that are like-minded for you. Maybe if I think about pregnancy care center, maybe there's a women's shelter for women who've been abused that could be they're doing different ministry, but they have the same potential clients or the same potential value system. So there'll be organizations you could connect and build relationships with there that may not be a strong financial supporter, but maybe someone that supports you programmatically, that supports you in other ways, if you think about that relationship. So again, linkage we think is super important. It's either natural and relational, or it's something that you create. And again, this is just more of a reminder, kind of this notion of the affinity groups, those different groups of people, groups of individuals that have some sort of connection to you through shared values that you may or may not know. And what are those groups that we can start to begin to work on and think through prayerfully? Is this a group I want to pursue and work with maybe a little closer? So just take a couple minutes here, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, and think through, after that little explanation, what are 2 or 3 groups that you can identify with your ministry? Is it a group of church individuals or church fellowships? Is it a group of particular individuals? We tell the story about a group of people that we worked with a Christian school in Arizona. They all happen to be as a Lutheran school, so they were supported by Lutheran churches in the area. So we identified a subset of people who were business people in the area who attended the Lutheran churches. They're Lutheran business people, men and women. And we kind of developed a subset, affinity group of just those individuals. And we created a strategy where we met with them separately as business people, talking to them about the importance of the Lutheran Christian education in their community, and invited them to be a part of that relationship because they were Lutheran business people. So it's kind of a subset of the Lutheran church population. So just think through, have a piece of paper handy, write down some of those groups you can think through, and then think through, are there, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 individuals that you wish were connected to your organization, but are not currently? People in your community, church leaders within your various orbit, someone who might be a national leader in your ministry's arena of Christian schools, of a child evangelism, of pregnancy care. What are those people? Who are those people that you wish you could connect with for whatever reason? It could be a champion, could be an advocate, could be a donor potential, but who are those people? And then begin to think through, who are these people that I could connect with that might know this individual, might have a connection with this group of people. In our community, there are probably 4 or 5 very influential pastors. So if we want the churches in our area to get behind a project, we know that we have to have a couple of those pastors on board, because they're the ones that drive a lot of the church activity in the community. And likewise, we know there are 2 or 3 pastors that we don't want to have involved, because they're the lightning rods. They're the ones that are controversial in the community. We don't want them to be part of our organization or our project. But you kind of categorize people in that way as well. I guess that'd be a disaffinity group, not an affinity group. So let's kind of move into that second item we talk about, that's qualifying. How do we figure out who we talk to and begin to ask and invite to partner with our organization? And again, at this point, given the technology, anybody in the world could be in a relationship with us. I actually gave money last fall to a friend of mine I met on social media. The only connection we have is we really like to do outdoor backpacking and camping and wilderness experiences, and we met on social media through that. Never met the man. He lives about 2 hours away from me, but he was doing a walk for life for Pregnancy Care Center and was asking for sponsorship. So I clicked yes, and I provided a nominal contribution, and he sent me a very gracious thank you note. So my relationship is really more with him than it is with the community or the group that I gave the money to. But the relationship with him, and I would have never met him otherwise. And we always talk about trying to get together and actually do a hike together sometimes, because that's our connector, that's our commonality. But there's certainly ways that we can connect with people and have commonalities with them. So let's think through different ways to qualify. We don't encourage or necessarily uh, promote all of these, but these are different ways you can look at that. Number one, look at linkage. How is that person connected to us in our relationship to them or their relationship to our ministry? We think that's a very important way to go. Many groups, especially in this country, look at wealth. You know, if you're a big university and you're going to do some huge capital campaign, you're trying to raise several $1 million, and actually some endowments now are looking billions of dollars US. You're looking for people who are alumni who have made a lot of money, and that's how they qualify people. I don't necessarily think that's necessarily a smart way to build a relationship, but that's how people do it. Sometimes it's based on profession. We encourage heartbeat organizations, pregnancy care centers, to think through who are the medical people in your community you can build relationships with: doctors, nurses, first responders. So that can make a lot of sense in some respects. The example of the Lutheran business people, they had a profession, happened to be Lutherans, happened to be business people. We turned that into a way to qualify them and then begin to build relationships with them. What are some of the interests that people have that may be common to your ministry or to your organization? Or other special needs? And for me, a special need might be the air conditioner unit or the furnace in our building is about ready to go out, but we have this person that helps repair our furnace. Might they be interested in helping to donate or give some in-kind physical equipment, a new furnace or that sort of thing, because we have a special need that meets their relationship with us or meets kind of how they are in relationship to us. So there are just some ways, and there are others as well, but I think those are some ways. We would always focus on the linkage and the type of relationship that you have. So here's a model I think you might be able to find useful. This is something Jerry devised, wow, probably 40 years ago. He was working with he just started as the development director of a Christian college and seminary, and his job was his was his stated job. His job was to make sure there were more people in the database. That was his job. The president said, get more people in the database. We need more people in the database. We need more donors. And Jerry took home big stacks of the green and white pen printed paper that you used to be able to see. You didn't see it anymore. The accounting paper and great big long reams of that, and took it home over several nights and started to study that. And he realized that, you know, we have a lot of people on the donor database. We have a lot of people there who aren't donating to us, but they're doing other things with the organization. So what does that mean? So we kind of came up with this model over time, and it's the AID model, and it simply means attend, involve, and donate. And it's a way to begin to classify or categorize people already in your donor base, already in your database system, on your email list, in terms of how they are interacting with you as an organization and as a database. Now remember, if they're not in your database yet, if you haven't created that linkage, it doesn't count. You know, you can't say, oh, you know, we want Bill Gates in our donor base. Well, that's okay, but unless you have Bill Gates's name and address and phone number and email in your records, he doesn't count. But anyhow, think through that, or Richard Branson, or whoever, is kind of the mega millionaire that people would love to have them um, support their organization. So if they're not in the database, they don't count. But think through this attend, involve, and donate idea. Um, and again, that's what the AID stands for. So Jerry, as he started to look through the database rather of his college that he just started working at, he realized there were a lot of people who had gone to um, class reunions, had gone to other functions with the university put on, but they weren't necessarily donating. Or they had people who were involved as, advocates for the university in their community. They helped start maybe a local chapter of alumni within that community, but they also weren't donating. They had people who were donating but weren't doing anything else with the organization. So he came up with this categorization to kind of help figure out where people were in relationship to the university based on how they were engaged in university activities. Now, that attend, involve, donate may not be the best match for you culturally. I understand that. So think through how that might work for you. So this is how we kind of define those within this AID model. Attend is just they've come to something, they've attended a meeting, they've attended a banquet, they come to a reunion, they've come to our annual meeting, whatever, they've attended something, they've heard about the mission, they know what we're about, they know what we do, but they've attended something and that's it. Or they've been involved. Maybe they've volunteered to serve our ministry at an event they attended or something like that. But maybe they haven't heard about the mission. They don't know exactly what we do, but they came and helped out, or they're somehow involved in a process. We have a number of people who in this Heartbeats pregnancy world that we're a part of in this country, they are really big on banquets, and almost every one of them does an annual banquet, and they look for people to help serve at those banquets. Serve the coffee and put the plates down and take the plates away, that sort of thing. So many of those people are involved as a volunteer, but they're not listening to the message, not listening to the speaker that night, because they're busy working, pulling plates and filling up coffee cups. So they're kind of this notion of involved. So the attend and involve may not match exactly what you're trying to do for your ministry, but think through how you might be able to categorize that. So let's just give this fictitious example of a ministry. This is called Seeking God's Best Ministry. Let me kind of give you an example of this. So we have Andrew attender, and he has attended an event. So we're just going to give him a little X in the attendance box of the AID model. And then there's Greg and Elaine, and we're kind of active. We've helped serve at a couple of events. We've helped volunteer on some volunteer days, and we've also attended some things. So we've got 2 of those things we have going on. And then we have Vivian volunteer, and Vivian is really good. She always shows up to help stuff envelopes every month for the monthly newsletter, but that's really about all she does at this point. And then there's Jerry and Sue Twombly, and they are just the ultimate partner with us, and they attend many things. They're very involved in terms of volunteering, and they also donate. So let's see what that looks like. So Andrew Attender obviously has one of those AID items in place in terms of his relationship with seeking God's best ministry. Greg and Elaine, we have 2 of those, right? That's pretty common sense, pretty obvious. Vivian volunteer, again, she has one, but it's a different one than Andrew. And then Jerry and Sue obviously have all 3 of those. So let's look at what that might look like on a staircase. So this is how we've laid this out. So in addition to the AID, we're going to talk about ABCD. Now that's a very US-centric scale related to education and grades in this country. A, all the best students. D, not so much the best students. C and B, someplace in between. So this ABCD may not work for you. You may choose to do 1, 2, 3, 4. You may choose to do a color system. Maybe you want to do green, blue, yellow, red. I don't know. Think about something that works for you as you think about how to categorize these individuals or qualify these individuals. So it may not be ABCD, but I think you understand kind of what I'm thinking. So people in the database, remember they have to be in the database or they don't count, who are somehow in the database. Maybe they've asked for information, maybe came, maybe they signed up online for a sign-up sheet, but they not done anything with us in terms of engagement, we would say that's kind of a no AID that involved in anything with us at this point, and they would have this D rating, or maybe it's a 4, or maybe it's red. I don't know. You can decide how that best works for you. Someone who's done one of those three things gets a C. Two of those three things would be a B. Doesn't matter which two, just two of those things would be a B. And if they're involved in all three of those, they would get an A. So the thinking is we want to get people who are D's to become C's, people who are C's to become B's, people who are B's to become A's. What that starts to do is it really starts to connect and give you a strategy for how to approach a particular group of individuals to make sure that you can get them from the C to a B. So obviously people who are donating, but all they're doing is one thing, they're donating, you want to get them involved as a volunteer or as a prayer partner or some other way. What you ask them to do, going back to Keith's notion of a call to action, what you're asking them to do would be very different than someone who's attended something and hasn't donated, or has attended something and hasn't volunteered yet. So you begin to really craft a message that's very specific to where this individual is in their relationship with you. So again, trying to get C's to B's and B's to A's. What we do know, so here's our example again. Andrew and Vivian are in that C step. Greg and Elaine are on that B because we did two of the three, and Jerry and Sue are obviously the A students in this example because they've been involved in all three. Now, what we know over time, just because we've done this with so many clients over the years, is the likelihood of someone responding to your invitation, responding to your call to action, if they have nothing in place, if they have done nothing with you yet, you have about a 10% likelihood of them responding in a positive way or hearing your message because of where they are on that staircase. It's not a judgment, it's simply a fact. They've not done anything with you, therefore they are a D, and they have about 10% likelihood of them listening to you and paying attention to your appeal or your call to action. Someone who's done one of those three things, about a 30% opportunity, likelihood to listen to you. A B, about a 60%, and an A, about 90% likelihood that they'll respond to you in a positive way because they're already connected. So from a time management standpoint, you don't want to spread your time equally across all four of those. You want to focus mostly on the A's and the B's. At the same time, you don't ignore the C's and the D's, but you want to work with them in a different way with a different call to action than you're working with the A's and the B's. So again, it's a way to keep track of people where they are in relationship to your ministry based on how engaged they are in your ministry. It doesn't matter if you're using a sheet of paper, if you're using a complex commercial database management system, a spreadsheet, whatever, there's a way to track that. So Jerry, back to his very first example, when he came up with this idea, he was able to go through, and I think at that point that university had like 45,000 people in the database, all of them in different places, like A, B, C's, and D's. He identified where they were, A, B, C, and D, across the 45,000. And rather than grow the database, he grew the activity of the people already in the database. So like 3 years later, instead of having a database that was 4 times as big and people weren't as active, he had the same number of people in the database, but they had generated 4 times more donations because of the way they begin to interact with people based on their relationship with the individuals in that area. So here's a quick self-reflection. We're going to go to some small groups here in just a couple of minutes, but just think through the groups that you support, maybe outside of your local church fellowship, because we're all supposed to tithe, right? But think through other organizations and ministries that you support. Where are you in relationship to that organization? If you were in their office, where would they put you on their AID scale, on their ABC stair step? Are you an A? Are you a B? If you're an A in some organizations, why are you an A in those organizations? Or if you're a C in some of those organizations, why are you a C? So just think through for yourself, where are you in relationship to ministries that you support, that you work with, and why are you there? There's something, and it goes back to that relationship continuum we talked about at the very beginning. Someplace in there, if you're an A, with that other ministry that you support, there's something really going on there. The us and the we is clearly in play because you're very active and engaged with that ministry that you're supporting, either as a prayer partner, as a financial partner, as an advocate, whatever. If you're a C, then maybe it's still, we're talking about I and me, and that relationship pronoun has not changed yet. But why is that you're a C with one ministry, but you're an A with another? So if you think about that for yourself, then you begin to think about that in terms of other people that are connected to your ministry. So we're going to do kind of a two-phase thing here. We're going to do just a 5-minute of just think time. I want you to kind of think to yourself, think of 3 to 5 people in your ministry who you would classify as an A or a B in a database system. Now I realize you may not have, this whole system process figured out yet, but you can probably think through people who are highly engaged, they're financial supporters, they volunteer when called upon, they're a strong prayer supporter, however you want to categorize that, or think through that. But think of 3 or 5 people who are in your database that in your commitment, in your ministry, and think through, how did they get there? What was their first exposure event to your organization, if you know? What's happened along the way that got them from a D to a C to a B to an A in relationship to your ministry? So think through what that journey is, and then is there a way to duplicate or replicate that journey for others?